Peace, family. Welcome back to the channel. In this one, we're going to go over an article to show the origin of the Seminoles in respect to their slave resisting system and the reason that most of these people ended up in Florida in the first place. But it says Native American history, the Yamasee War ends native slave trade, and this is about an upcoming conference they're having. Few American Indian wars were more devastating to the colonists and more influential on the development of the South than the Yamasee War of 1715. April 15th will mark the 300th anniversary of the start of the war, which ended with the death of 400 British. On April 16th, the conference to bring recognition of the war will be held in St. Augustine, Florida, mere steps from Yemassee archaeological sites. The Yamasee, as a people, have been overlooked by the mainstream, and only one book has been written about the war. Dennis Bosey, associate professor of history at the University of North Carolina, she says Bosey is one of the organizers of the conference, entitled "The Yamasee Indians from Florida to South Carolina." It is a really important event in Southern and Northern American history, yet it is one of the least known of the wars compared with its importance, she said. The late 16th and early 1700s were a time of great disruption and loss of land as colonization forced tribes to be on the move. Chester the Prater, an archaeologist and co-organizer of the conference, explained, by the time the Yemassee made their way to Charleston, the Spanish had already been missionizing tribes in Florida for 100 years. The British were involved in the slave trade throughout the Southeast and Atlantic world, which included trade routes of importation of plants, goods, slaves, and diseases, all other items of colonization. It says other Indians like the Chickasaw were making people move. The Erie had been forced out of western Pennsylvania by the Iroquois, and they had moved south. They became known as the Westos. They pushed the Yamasee towards Georgia coast. The Erie had traded for guns with the French and British, but in the south the tribes were unarmed. The Spanish had been more interested in missionizing than trading with the natives, the Prater said. According to him, arms could be a major incentive for the Yamasees moving up the coast to Charleston. While there, they joined in the deer skin trade. However, the Prater noted, they were also sent off to bring in Indian slaves. There is clear evidence that there were slavers that were slaving, he said. So Donald Green, a Yamasee and a Haudenosaunee scholar and professor of transnational American studies at SUNY Buffalo, will also be presenting at the upcoming conference. For several years, white slave traders would come in and run up the Yamasee's debt for pots, pans, and guns, he said. When people couldn't pay the debt, the traders would demand women and children, take them to Charleston to sell them. This went on for 10 years, and that was a revolt. So we getting into this basically these Yamasees coming under the threat of slavery. And when we look at the depiction from the Yamasee Wars that we about to get into, the depiction shows that this is a black tribe. It's black people fighting clearly European people. So let's get into it. The lifestyle of most of the natives in the region had deteriorated. A diplomatic meeting was called between the Yamasee and the Lower Creek to address the state of affairs. Bossy said that when the British heard about the meeting, they sent some of their own traders and diplomats. Some of the traders who tried to smooth things over, but one trader, John Wright, threatened the Yamasee, basically with enslavement and murder, because they viewed them as black people only. If you was black, you fit the description on being a slave. Bossy said, the next day, the Yamasee were no longer eager to trade with them, and this was the start of the war. In a book, The Yamasee War, Arthur William Ramsey wrote, wars from virtually every nation in the South, from the Catawbas and their Piedmont neighbors in the Carolinas to the Choctaws of Mississippi, joined together in one of the most potent Native American coalitions to ever oppose the British in colonial North America. The warriors surrounded Charleston on every front but the sea, Ramsey wrote, who will also be a speaker at the conference. Green and Ramsey both describe the Yamasee War as the bloodiest in colonial America. There is a reason why it hasn't been talked about much because we almost won. Green said almost 10% of the white population of South Carolina was killed, and almost all of them were slave catchers. Because the Seminoles, the Yamasees, just like their descendants, the Seminoles, had a war against slavery. They themselves wasn't going to be enslaved, and they wasn't going to allow anybody else to be. After the devastating loss and the destruction of the outlying settlements, North Carolina and South Carolina ended the native slave trade by the British through slavery. Though slavery among some of the tribes continued, while those already enslaved were not freed, the British turned exclusively to trading African slaves. So after the war, South Carolina kind of retracted into itself, and the South was completely reshaped in a number of different ways, Bossy said. It was more than a decade after the war before resettlement began. As for the Indian communities, they committed to being a confederacy. One of the things you can take from this war is that the Indians brought an end to the slave trade of Indians. That's at least until the Seminoles get into the picture, because they was enslaving Seminoles no matter if they were black Indians or imported Africans. Because no, it's not the same. In the following year, the Yamasee dispersed into safety in several different locations. Green said many Seminoles relocated to Georgia, which was not settled yet. Others went with the Creek, and others joined the Gale in in St. Augustine, the Prater reported. Now the Gale is where we get the term Gullah. It doesn't come from Angola. It actually comes from the Gale tribe, who also made up the Florida Seminoles. The Yamasee became known as a refugee tribe, picking up people from different groups along the way. Green said that after the war, those who relocated to Georgia were safe from slave catchers, no matter their race or heritage. That explains the rise of the multiracial heritage. Black slaves who ran from South Carolina knew that they could make it across the Savannah River, they would be free. They could join us in the same way this us, I'm not quite sure who this person is talking, what his racial heritage is, but it's a fact that the Yamasee was a black tribe. So I'm hoping that this guy that I'm saying us for is a black person. But they could join us in the same way they later went into Florida to join the Seminoles. Georgia wasn't founded until 1733. So they was already settled in there. So these people will eventually become the same people who became the Florida Seminoles. That's basically the point we're getting at here. St. Augustine, Florida, now they're going to talking about celebrate 450 years since the arrival of Ponce de Leon. But that's my main point in here. I wanted to show you the Yamasee War killed 10% of South Carolina's population because they was trying to enslave the Yamasee. The Yamasee warrior spirit to resist this colonization and to also resist slavery was the same type of traits that we would see in the Seminoles. So my thing is, when they was catching and enslaving these people and putting them on plantations, they was carrying this warrior message on as well. Because the Yamasee passed it to the Seminoles, they couldn't break that. They couldn't break that spirit. They definitely couldn't break the spirit when they was taking blacks out of Florida who was making it to freedom. They couldn't break that spirit when they was bringing them to the plantations. So this is the events that ended slavery, because you had all of these revolutionary blacks, hundreds and hundreds of them. So anytime that these people was enslaved, they would just pass on, man, if we get to Florida, we free. And it was rough for these Europeans to try to keep slavery intact. It's a fact. But it's a Free Black Society presentation. You know, the Yamasees, the predecessors of the Seminole warriors, and where they get their warrior spirit from. Peace.